The dinner was my idea, which I think is the part that stings the most when I look back on it now. I'd made the reservation at a Mediterranean place in Little Italy, the kind of spot with exposed brick and candles and wine bottles and a wait list on weekends. I'd been there twice before, both times with coworkers, and I'd been wanting to bring my family for months. I thought it would be a nice change from the usual Sunday dinners at my mom's house, where the kitchen always smelled like burnt garlic, and my brother-in-law always monopolized the remote before anyone had finished eating. I was 31. I had a good job, financial analyst at a mid-sized firm downtown Toronto. I owned my condo in Leslieville, drove a used Civic I had paid off 2 years early, and had managed to save more by 30 than most people I knew had at 40. I wasn't flashy about any of it. I didn't think I needed to be. But somehow, somewhere along the way, my family had figured out the rough shape of my finances, and once they knew, things shifted in ways I didn't fully register until it was too late. It started small, the way these things always do. My sister, I'll call her my older sister because that's all she ever wanted me to remember about her, had married a man named Kyle 3 years before that dinner. Kyle worked in HVAC sales and had opinions about everything and genuine expertise in nothing. They lived in Mississauga in a house they'd stretched well beyond their means to afford, and they had 2 kids under 5 who were objectively exhausting. I love my nephews. I want to be clear about that. But loving them didn't mean I had agreed to fund their upbringing, which is essentially what had happened. It started with a phone call. My sister needed help covering her property tax shortfall. Just that once, she said, just to avoid the penalty, she'd pay me back in the spring. I transferred 30 toes, $200. Spring came and went. She brought it up once, said she was tight, and I said it was fine. Because I wanted it to be fine. Because I loved her and she was my sister and it felt small at the time. But it wasn't small. It was a door, and once I opened it, my whole family walked through. Over the next 2 years, I paid my mom's dental work after she lost her benefits, $4,800. Fair enough. I wasn't going to let her suffer. I covered my sister's RRSP contribution deadline when she and Kyle came up short, $6,000, which she insisted was a loan. I bought both nephews their hockey gear 2 seasons in a row because Kyle had a bad quarter at work. I helped my aunt with a car repair. I quietly picked up the tab at family dinners more often than I count. I said yes when people asked, and sometimes I said yes before they finished asking, because I could see where the sentence was going and I didn't want anyone to feel embarrassed. None of it was ever paid back, not $1. Not a word about it unless I brought it up. And even then, it always somehow became about how lucky I was, how easy I had it, how some of us didn't have fancy desk jobs. I never called myself a bank. I never called them ungrateful. I just quietly did the math one night, really sat down with a spreadsheet the way I do at work, and the number was $47,000. $47,000 over 26 months. And that didn't include the dinners or the gas or the times I'd driven hours on weekends to help with things they could have hired someone else to do. I closed the spreadsheet and didn't mention it to anyone. That was my mistake, not the giving maybe, but the silence around it, the pretending it wasn't happening. The way I'd trained everyone to see my generosity as infrastructure rather than a choice. The night of the dinner, we were 8 people around a table designed for 6. My mom, my older sister Kyle, my aunt, my cousin who was in his 2nd year at Ryerson, my cousin's girlfriend who I'd met twice, and 2 of my mom's friends who had apparently been invited at the last minute, which I found out when they walked in. I'd already told the hostess our count. I apologized, we rearranged, it was fine. The food was good, the wine was good. I'd paid for the first bottle before anyone else could reach for the bill, which was normal. We were talking about nothing important. My cousin's program, whether the Leafs were going to choke again, my aunt's plans to visit her sister in Calgary, normal conversation, the kind that feels easy until it doesn't. I'm not sure what exactly started it. I think my mom had said something about a colleague's daughter getting engaged, and how lovely the ring was, and my aunt had said something about weddings being beautiful when you're with the right person. And then my cousin's girlfriend, she couldn't have been older than 20, she had the confidence only the very young or the very oblivious can carry, looked at me across the table and said with genuine curiosity in her voice, "Do you ever think about that? Like, settling down? You must be almost 35. I said I was 31. She nodded like that was somehow worse. "Still," she said, "don't you want that? Kids, the whole thing?" And I said, pleasantly, that I was happy with my life. And then Kyle, who I had helped financially in ways he didn't even fully know about because my sister handled the money between them and he was largely unaware of the specifics. Kyle leaned back in his chair and said, "Come on. Nobody actually wants to be alone. That's just something people say." He was smiling when he said it, like it was a joke, like it was harmless. My sister laughed, not a mean laugh, just she laughed. And my mom looked at her bread, and my aunt said nothing. And the girlfriend nodded like Kyle had made an excellent point. I looked around that table and I realized something that had been forming in me for months, maybe years, but that I'd been refusing to name. Not one person there had ever asked me how I was doing. Not really. They asked what I was doing, where I was working, why I wasn't married, whether I'd tried the apps, but not how I actually was. Not what I actually wanted, not what I was okay. They had my money and my time and my help, and they had never once been curious about me. I smiled. I said something neutral. I excused myself to use the restroom and I stood in the small tiled bathroom for about 90 seconds with the tap running and I made a decision. When I came back to the table, I was pleasant for the rest of the evening. I picked up the bill, all of it, for 8 people, $340 before tip, because at that point I had already decided it was the last time. On the drive home, I made a list on my phone at a red light, everything I was currently covering or had pending. My cousin's tuition top-up I'd agreed to think about. My sister's car insurance my mom had mentioned casually over the phone 2 weeks ago. The promise I'd half made about helping with my mom's furnace, which needed replacing before winter. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was upset, or not only because of that, but because I was doing the calculation. What it meant to stop. What would actually happen. Whether it made me a bad person or just a person with limits. By morning, I decided it made me a person. Just a person. I called my bank's financial services line when I got to work. I reorganized 2 joint accounts I'd been using to send transfers. I set up a single personal account that only I had access to. I sent one e-transfer to myself from the shared account. It had my money in it. And then I closed the shared account. My cousin's top-up was going to be a no. The car insurance was going to be a no. The furnace was going to be a no. Or rather, I would help research options. I would help my mom apply for the Ontario Renovates program. But I was not going to write a check. I didn't call anyone to announce this. I didn't send a message. I went about my week. On Thursday, my sister called. I let it ring. She called again. I let it ring. She texted, "Call me when you get a chance. It's about Mom's account." Which wasn't even a real thing. I didn't have a shared account with my mom, so I understood that she'd already figured out something had changed. She called 6 more times by Friday evening. On Saturday morning, my mom called. She was gentle about it, the way she always was when she needed something, her voice soft, a little confused sounding, like she couldn't quite understand what might have happened. She said she'd tried to access something and it wasn't going through. I said I'd reorganize my accounts. She said, "But how does that affect?" And I said, gently, "It means I'm not going to be doing transfers the way I used to, Mom." There was a long pause. She said, "You're upset about something?" And I said, "I'm not upset, I just made some changes." She said she didn't understand, and I said I knew, and I said I loved her, and we got off the phone. By Sunday, my sister had called 22 more times. I know the number because I counted. My phone just kept lighting up face down on my kitchen counter while I meal prepped for the week, and every time it buzzed, I'd turn it over and see her name and turn it back. She left 3 voicemails. The first one was confused. The second one was frustrated. The third one was, and I say this with some sadness because she is my sister and I do love her, entitled. She said I was being selfish. She said family didn't do this to each other. She said Kyle had a lot going on right now and the timing was really not great. She said the timing was not great. I thought about $47,000. I thought about Kyle at the restaurant, leaning back in his chair, smiling, telling me that nobody actually wants to be alone. I didn't call back. On Monday evening, I was on my couch watching something I can't remember now when my phone rang again. It was my sister. I don't know why I picked up that time. Maybe because it was quiet in my apartment. Maybe because I was tired of the weight of the unanswered calls sitting on me. Maybe because I'd had enough time to feel completely clear. She didn't say hello. She said, "What is going on with you?" I said, "Hi." She said, "Don't do that. You've been ignoring me for days. Kyle is stressed. The boys need their registration fees by the end of the month, and Mom is upset. What is happening?" I said, "I've decided to stop supplementing the family finances." She said, "What does that even mean?" I said, "It means I won't be covering things the way I have been. The accounts I was using for that are closed." She made a sound I can't quite describe, somewhere between a laugh and a gasp, and then she said, "Because of what happened at dinner? Because of a joke?" I said, "No, because I've been giving money I worked hard for to people who don't seem to think very much of me, and I've decided that's not something I want to keep doing." She said, "That's not fair. We appreciate you." I said, "Your husband told a room full of people that nobody actually wants to be alone." Nobody pushed back, including you. She said, "He was kidding, Melissa." That's not my name. I mean, Melissa is not the name I'm using here. But she said my actual name and the way she said it, like I was being dramatic, like I was being difficult, like I was the one making something out of nothing. I felt something settle in me, like sediment after water stills. I said, "I know you think he was kidding. I know you think I'm overreacting, and I'm not calling to fight about that. I'm just letting you know that things are going to be different going forward, and I hope you'll be able to manage, and I genuinely mean that." She said, "You can't just." I said, "I love you, take care of yourself," and I hung up. She called 4 more times that evening. I didn't answer. My mom texted twice, short messages, careful ones, the kind that are designed to feel neutral but carry a lot of freight. My aunt called once, which surprised me, though maybe it shouldn't have. I made tea. I sat by my window. The street outside was doing its ordinary Toronto autumn thing. Someone walking a dog, a streetcar grinding past, leaves from the maple on my block going orange and stubborn at the edges. I thought about the spreadsheet. I thought about $47,000. I thought about what $47,000 would have meant differently. A down payment, a safety net, a year off to figure out what I actually wanted. I thought about the bathroom at the restaurant, the tap running, the 90 seconds I'd spent deciding. And then I thought about something else. I hadn't cried once through any of this. Not at the dinner, not during the calls, not while I was closing the accounts. And I wasn't going to start now. Not because I was numb or because I didn't care. I care deeply in the way you can only care about people who have been with you your whole life. But because I was done performing grief about something I'd finally gotten right. I went back to work. I started maxing out my TFSA properly for the first time. I booked a solo trip to Portugal I'd been putting off for 3 years. I had a few awkward months where family events were tense and my mom went quiet on calls in a way that felt pointed. And Kyle avoided looking at me directly at Christmas, which was fine, because I avoided looking at him too. My cousin, the one in second year at Ryerson, texted me out of nowhere in February, not about money, just to say he'd seen something downtown he thought I'd like, a new exhibit at the AGO, and did I want to go sometime? I said yes, we went. He didn't mention any of it, and neither did I. He paid for his own coffee and I paid for mine, and it was, honestly, one of the nicer afternoons I'd had in a while. Slowly, things resettled not into what they were, into something more honest. My sister and I talk now, but differently, less often. There's a carefulness between us that wasn't there before, and I think we've both accepted that this is just what it is now. My mom and I are fine. She hasn't asked me for anything financial since. I don't know if that's because she understands or because she's waiting, and I've decided it doesn't matter. I am not the family bank anymore. I am not the safety net, the quiet solution, the number people call before they call anyone else. I am a person with the life I built, and the boundaries I keep now are not walls. They're just the shape of who I actually am, which it took me too long to stop apologizing for. I'm 32 now. I live alone and I like it. I have friends I see regularly, work I find genuinely interesting, and a trip to the Azores booked for next spring that nobody in my family knows about because I've learned that some things are better when they belong entirely to you. I don't think about the $47,000 very often anymore. When I do, I try to think of it as tuition. Expensive, yes, but it taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. That generosity without self-respect isn't kindness. It's just a different kind of disappearing. I stopped disappearing. It turns out that's the only thing that was ever really missing. I still think about that bathroom in Little Italy sometimes. The tap running, the noise of the restaurant on the other side of the door, and me standing there counting to 90 in my head like that was going to change anything. It didn't change anything, of course. What changed things was the decision I'd already made before I walked back out. There's a version of this story where I come across as cold, where closing those accounts looks like punishment, like I was taking my toys and going home. I understand why someone might see it that way, but here's what I've come to believe. Honestly, after sitting with all of it for more than a year now, what I did wasn't punitive. It was just accurate. I finally made my actions match what I actually valued instead of performing a version of generosity that had stopped being genuine a long time ago. Kyle's comment at that dinner, that nobody actually wants to be alone, wasn't what broke something. It was what finally showed me what had already been broken. He said it casually, in front of people I'd been quietly supporting for years, and nobody said a word. Not my sister. Not my mom. And that silence told me everything about what my presence at that table actually meant to them, not who I was, what I provided. Those are different things, and I'd spent too long pretending they weren't. The $47,000 wasn't the real cost. The real cost was the version of myself I'd slowly edited out, the one who had opinions about what her money was for, who had limits, who needed things too. I'd made myself so frictionless that I'd almost disappeared. And the strange thing is, nobody noticed until the transfers stopped. What I've learned, not in a tidy packaged way, but in the slow, uncomfortable way that actual learning tends to work, is that integrity isn't just about being honest with other people. It's about being honest with yourself first. I knew the arrangement had become unhealthy long before that dinner. I knew it every time I opened that spreadsheet and felt something tighten in my chest. I just kept choosing the easier thing, which was to say yes and feel temporary relief instead of the longer, harder work of saying no and meaning it. And the saying no, that took something I hadn't fully built yet. It took the willingness to be seen as difficult, to let my sister call 22 times without answering, to sit with the discomfort of knowing my mom was hurt and choosing not to fix it immediately the way I always had. That kind of steadiness doesn't come from not caring. It comes from caring about the right thing more than you care about the discomfort of the moment. I don't think I'm better than my sister or Kyle or any of them. I think they got used to something I offered too freely, and I let that happen, and then I stopped letting it happen. The cause produced the effect. When I changed the cause, the effect changed too. It's not more complicated than that, and it doesn't need to be. I'm 32 and I'm building something real now, not just financially, but in terms of who I let in and how close. Connor texted me about the AGO exhibit and we went and split the bill and nobody brought up a single transfer. That afternoon felt more like family than most of the dinners I paid for. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the $47,000, not Kyle's smug lean back in his chair, just a quiet Saturday afternoon at a gallery, paying for my own coffee, feeling completely like myself.